So I got there at 11:41, which is the time on the app on my handy dandy iPhone Rail Runner app. And yes, I do take the train on occasion, mostly to Santa Fe. This time to Berlin, also on a Saturday. But I had the Saturday schedule. I knew what I was doing. Saturday southbound schedule. Train is supposed to depart from the Montano station at 11:41. But you get there and you realize I'm not here when everybody would be here. And yeah, it's a Saturday. The Rail Runner doesn't have a whole lot of ridership, as we've talked about in the past. But with nobody getting on the train, I thought something is definitely wrong here. And I went and checked the station schedule. At the station, they had the schedule posted. And lo and behold, it was not leaving at 11:41 from Montano Station. The train was actually leaving at 11:21 from the Montano Station. And I went up and looked, and the Santa Fe Depot, that's the first stop on a southbound route. It was 10:20 on my app. It was 10 a.m. on the station posted schedule. So somebody changed the time of the train 20 minutes forward, which means I missed the train by a good solid 15 minutes.
Well, that is very unfortunate, Paul. And yes, in these days of multiple channels of communication, you have a website, you have an app, you have maybe social media. When they're not all aligned, bad things happen. Nothing for me is more frustrating than to have a company's posted time, usually on Google, and then you go there and they're like, oh, that's not right. So not good at all. My experiences with the Rail Runner, I once almost died of frostbite when I was coming back from Santa Fe, and it was delayed like 2 hours when it was like 15 degrees and blowing, and I was there at the station. But yeah, the train, it is, I don't know, what shall we say? It is not necessarily real transportation in any meaningful numbers, and then when stuff like this happens, it even is not as good as it maybe could be for tourism and other things. But that's cool. Good to hear. There's a train depot, a hub there, a train store in Berlin. Something to do. That sounds like that could be a fun outing for many people. But
yeah, it's one of the many issues with transit, and I would say that of the pains, the PIA factor of mass transit, possibly missing or having to go when the train goes as opposed to when you want to go, is the biggest single drawback. Now, that is the same whether you're taking a bus, whether you're taking a train, whether you're taking an airplane. But airplanes, we all know, are sufficiently fast, especially over long distances relative to the alternative, that taking a plane overall makes a lot of sense. So you generally are more than happy to get there an hour early for the plane, because you know that over the span of 400 or whatever miles or more, that you are ultimately saving a lot of time. The train, Rail Runner, by and large, depending on the place you're going, takes as much time or more. There is the ambiance, and that was certainly part of my goal here with the kids, of experiencing the fun of the train. Nothing like that Rail Runner beep beep when you have the doors closed, etc. And of course, we were going to a model train museum there in Berlin, but ultimately drove. It was a totally different experience. We had the freedom to do what we wanted when we got there. We weren't limited to kind of where we could walk from the train station in Berlin. We could go at our own pace and wound up changing plans dramatically, in many ways for the better. So just the Rail Runner folks did respond on Twitter. They basically said that they are trying to get this changed, and that's a separate issue, is kind of the way, seemingly, and this isn't the only time I've experienced this issue just in the last couple of days, is businesses and their control or lack of control over the apps that they that so many ways drive their business. I understand if the rail runner folks do not have complete control over their app, that they're dealing with IT contractors. Now this, I did look, and the schedule posted at the station itself was from June of 2023. So this is not some like we just changed this. And I also looked carefully at the app, and the rail runner folks said that there was a notification that the schedule was incorrect. That was not readily available, or something that was clearly stated.
Well, and if you can do a notice that the schedule's incorrect, why don't you just correct the schedule?
Ding, ding, ding.
Well, and Paul, you bring up an important point generically, and I don't want to digress too much, but yes, if you're a business or a government entity and you don't control your URL, your website address, your Google My Business Google address, and hours of operation in any apps, you're setting yourself up for huge trouble. And I see it very regularly with people that come to me for assistance in my business, as well as just going around. So not unusual, but certainly is frustrating. And here's the thing: if you don't know those three things about your business, whether you're a government entity, not-profit, or business, you better find out, because it will come back to bite you. I guarantee you.
Yeah, a little helpful business advice.
Yeah, and it's one of
policy.
No, not policy, but it's one of those. It's like they say that if you're not paying for something, you are the product. And here's the thing: a lot of these online services, you don't pay for them, but if you don't have control of them, it's a double whammy. It really can hurt you. So that's too bad. But I'm glad you recovered and had a good trip. But you know what? What was it? 3 less rail runner tickets were sold.
Exactly. Yeah. The profits for the so-called profits for the rail runner are just plummeting. But yeah, it was. I want to reiterate, it was a neat little museum down there. Whatever you want to call it, museum display. It's relatively new in terms of the location and the purpose of the location. You can go online. It's available there, and find out more information if you want to go by and visit. And they have a rather large rail yard where they have the real big size trains, and it's right there in that area. So neat to check that out as well. Well, changing gears just a bit. This is, of course, prime turkey time. Turkey in an oven, not a stove, but what kind of stove or oven are we talking about there? And one of the stories of the past year was the Biden administration throwing a trial balloon up there in terms of getting rid of gas-powered stoves. Of course, we've been talking about this because Martin Heinrich, U.S. Senator from New Mexico, he's a big fan of electrify everything, does not care for gas-powered appliances very much. It's like smoking 18 packs of cigarettes a day, or this, that, or the other. I'm slightly exaggerating, but a lovely picture of Kamala Harris and the first gentleman, or second gentleman, where Doug Emhoff, that's his name, was posted around social media. And of course they were in the process of getting their Thanksgiving together. I make no, in this particular case, while I have no love for Kamala Harris or her politics, she is standing right there by a lovely gas-powered stove. So, not saying she's a hypocrite. I'm only saying that even Biden administration functionaries, people who are pushing very left-wing environmental policies, all the way to getting rid of gas-powered stoves and ovens, she there with Doug Emhoff posing right in front of her oven, highlights, I think, the reality that when push comes to shove, that's what they use too. They're just like us. They use a gas-powered stove too.
Yeah, and Paul, I saw that picture and I didn't even need to read the headlines. I spotted it immediately that was a gas-powered stove, and I have three theories about what that picture was designed to do. And the first is a subtle thumbing of her nose at the big guy, at her boss, at the president.
Conspiracy theory.
That's number one. Number two is this may be a, albeit subtle and not that huge of a thing, but maybe a policy shift by the vice president, that she's not necessarily all on board with the get rid of all of our gas appliances. And third, which is maybe I think the most likely, is just a unintentional, unknowing faux pas that they didn't even think about it when they took the picture. So I'm not sure. It's got to be one of those, I would think. But yeah, in this world now, you know what? Everything's political even when you're not a politician, and when you're the vice president, everything is certainly political. And to not notice that, I don't know, that just seems strange to me.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go with the latter, which is that she just wasn't thinking about it. Because, there is, as we always talk about in the economics field and the political and policy field, there is expressed preference when it comes to what you actually do. The same being that Lujan Grisham still rides around in a gas-powered SUV while she is out touting these electric vehicles as a political solution. And it's the same way with Vice President Harris and her husband. So I do not, for one, begrudge them their gas stove. I am perfectly accepting and happy that they are out posting these lovely pictures of them on Thanksgiving. And I will just note and use those pictures the next time somebody in the Biden administration floats the harebrained idea of trying to get rid of gas stoves. So, even Martin Heinrich, to be fair, and Martin Heinrich is as much of a true believer about these kinds of things as any politician in the entire country. Heinrich has backed off talking about how horrible gas stoves are. So the trial balloon went up, and much like the Chinese balloon, it got shot down. It
flew over the United States for a couple of weeks, and then we figured out that wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, and even Heinrich has kind of, at least on social media, backed off of that. Speaking of energy issues, something I think is deserving of comment here is Heinrich and others, again, mostly true believers, but generally speaking, a lot of these folks who are touting clean energy, renewable energy, wind and solar, love to discuss the number of workers that are employed in those industries. Now, I will admit that this is a double-edged sword, because this is a political challenge as well as a kind of economic or financial challenge. But there's a chart, there's numerous charts out there. This one's from the International Energy Agency, showing global energy employment by sector and how wind and solar, to be specific, are really growing in the number of people they employ and surpassing fossil fuels. Now, when it comes to the amount of energy produced, fossil fuels still far outweigh the wind and solar industries. And that, I think, is the critical factor here, is that if you did a thought experiment, Wally, and said you have an energy source that costs absolutely nothing and is consistent, reliable, and
environmentally friendly, no downsides,
and just all it did was produce energy, you would take it. Well, all you're doing here is just taking that thought experiment forward and saying, look, these wind and solar, these sources of energy, one of the things that drives up the cost of those relative to traditional energy sources is the intensity of how many employees they need to function. And wind and solar are very intense industries for employment, which drives up their cost, which means that they rely more and more on subsidies relative to other energy sources. This is a not a feature.
Yeah, and Paul, we're in the midst of a very interesting economy. We have a lot of inflation. Employment is strong. There are a lot of jobs that go unanswered. And I just want to say that the thing that's not been talked about much, and I think it needs to be, and it's like a lot of the issues that the Rio Grande Foundation has raised. Let me raise this one is productivity, which is the amount of output for labor dollars. Used to be a hugely talked about and a hugely watched statistic because it's the kind of employment you have that when jobs are, employment is plentiful and productivity is high, you get a lot of affluence. People make a lot of money and you don't have inflation chipping away at it. So the energy policy in the United States, where you have lots and lots of employment, but not less necessarily lots of output in the form of energy, is something that could really become a huge issue for a country like ours that's already suffering from huge inflationary pressures compared to the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's something that we are all, although politics should not, unfortunately it does infringe upon economic factors, and the clear difference between the wind and solar and the employment trends there, as opposed to even here in New Mexico, where oil and gas in southeast New Mexico are experiencing one of the greatest booms that we've ever seen in the history of New Mexico or any state, but you're not seeing a huge, massive boom in the number of people flocking to southeast New Mexico. If every barrel of oil that came out of the ground in southeast New Mexico required, some 0.01 additional employee, we would be seeing a lot more of those people coming to New Mexico. We would be seeing them likely registering to vote and changing the political calculations of the state. So what I'm getting at is that it is an unfortunate feature of the capitalist system that those industries that are efficient don't have to hire and pay as many employees. The inefficient ones do, and it's almost like a pass-through political contribution to the left side of the political spectrum.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and and that's that productivity. The oil and gas industry has been through its ups and downs, but with the new technologies now being tremendously well understood and utilized, they're able to get a lot of oil out of the ground with way fewer employees than they would have done just 10 years ago. But it's not the only industry. You look at companies like Intel in the semiconductor space, and a lot of other companies have definitely increased their efficiency over time, and that keeps products, the price of products down. It keeps the employment for those who have jobs at a high level, but doesn't necessarily bring more and newer jobs. And so, yeah, if we're going to build our job creation engine on the backs of something as inefficient as the green tech energy movement, I do think we're going to see some bumps in the road that I think will be noticed not just among the political class, but among people on Main Street, and living in towns like Albuquerque and small towns in New Mexico.
Yeah, and one final note on that, a project that we haven't directly talked about much, the SunZia project, which is ultimately new power lines, new high tension, high amounts of energy being pushed through them. Mostly, it's going across New Mexico. The idea is to generate the electricity, wind and solar, throughout the eastern prairie of New Mexico, and send it over to Phoenix and Southern California. SunZia, yet another Heinrich baby. $8 billion project, and you can talk about the jobs and all the economic impact. Well, we wouldn't be building SunZia were it not for the shift to wind and solar. We would be instead improving and building upon the efficiency and reliability of our existing energy infrastructure. But because you're taking an industry that was previously based on a few big power plants, especially those in the Four Corners, and instead dispersing it over a wide geographical area, yeah, that costs a lot of money. Ultimately, that comes back in terms of impacts on electricity prices or broader government subsidies. But we haven't taken at Rio Grande Foundation a position on SunZia. There's definitely issues, local environmental concerns with birds and flyways, and of course the cost is ultimately going to be borne by energy customers or taxpayers or both. This is just not it's not the way you develop economically. It's not going to be the boon that Heinrich believes it will be for New Mexico. Yes, you're going to have a lot of construction jobs. Yes, you're going to have some level of maintenance jobs in those wind and solar fields, but it's taking something that was perfectly functional, making it less functional, and spending a lot of money to do it.
Yeah, and then one of the things that not anytime, most times when I read articles about, the cost of wind and solar and batteries is so cheap, it's always at the time those devices are run, but not as you put them into a system that provides electricity for the world. The transmission and distribution systems. There's a lot of what would you say, apples to oranges comparisons when it comes to costs. And so to use a lot of these other energy sources does require a lot of additional infrastructure, an awful lot. And so hopefully that will work very well, because otherwise spending a lot of money and getting nothing out of it is certainly not a good thing. And we have certainly seen that with regard to energy projects, over the last 50 years in the U.S. And we're right in the middle of an absolutely tremendously huge experiment with regard to that.
Yeah. I was able to write a piece for the Albuquerque Journal, a follow-up relating to the past plan of the EIB. Again, a 3-2 vote of an unelected board, not even a bare majority of the board itself, appointed by Lujan Grisham, passing the requirements to buy 43% electric vehicles by the summer of 2026 and 82% by the summer of 2031. That would be up from 3% or thereabouts of new vehicles currently sold in the state. So I just want to flag that. That was from last Tuesday in the Journal. And, again, the car dealers are the folks really with the most to lose on this. And car dealers, it is notable from the New Mexico Car Dealers Association website, they average 56 employees per dealership, employing a total of 6,314 New Mexicans statewide. Of course, they pay numerous taxes like property, payroll, and income that Amazon, which is now entering the car dealing market, or folks in Texas aren't going to pay to New Mexico. They'll pay them to Texas, though. And these are, 6,314 jobs. Again, these are all private sector, non-governmental jobs. That's not a huge proportion of New Mexico's overall employment, but if you take this industry out by the knees and do what this law would do, if it is actually, if it comes to pass, it will have serious negative ramifications. So that was the thrust of my journal piece. I was able to write one about the flaws with electric vehicle technology before, as we tried to battle this out at the EIB. But this was kind of an after-action report and indicating where I think things are heading. And it's going to be ugly if we actually move forward as a state with this. I remain hopeful that Michelle Lujan Grisham was is term limited out. That is a fact, and that voters have a return to sanity, at least when it comes to the next governor of the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, and and Paul, you brought this point up in addition, to the car dealers. It's not that hard to get around the car dealer issue for the consumer. If you live in Cruces, you go to El Paso. If you live in Albuquerque, you might go to Lubbock or something and buy a vehicle. But the requirements that have been put in place for charging stations in places where they're just not proven to be needed. And I'm not saying we don't need charging stations. We need them. But boy, the heavy-handed broad brush stroke with regard to what they want to require for that, that could be the equivalent of, I don't know, quadrupling or worse of all taxes on real estate, and including new homes. And so in a place where we give lip service to homelessness and the ability to build new homes, but things like that move things definitely in the wrong direction. So this thing is a bundle of unintended consequences, or at least unanalyzed from those who put forward the policy.
So kind of simultaneously with the Environmental Improvement Board discussion, the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Air Quality Control Board, they also were there meeting. Now, to this day, I don't understand exactly what they could do independently of the EIB, but this is another powerful, another politically appointed board, unaccountable to the voters. And while the EIB voted on a bare 3-2 basis, the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Board voted 7-0, highlighting, I think, their true political calculations. Now, Councilor Dan Lewis, had pushed through council on a 5-4 basis a plan to basically really overhaul this Albuquerque Air Board, at least the Albuquerque component of the Air Board, make the people who serve on it, give them some certain scientific requirements, kind of like what was done with the PRC at one point, and to make sure that there is accountability through city council and that this board just can't be out doing whatever they want to do. And there have been proposals, including the Health, Environmental, and Equity Impacts Rule, which are being proposed specifically through the local board, so separate from the statewide standard. But it would be a way that this unelected body can really make life miserable for businesses or even UNM that require air quality permits. We're talking dry cleaners, auto body shops, concrete plants, schools, hospitals, and university facilities. And even UNM said, which is about as socialistic of a force in New Mexico as there is, which is saying a lot, UNM believes that the proposed regulation will negatively impact UNM operations on main campus and the Health Sciences Center. So you have a pretty broad group of people who have expressed concern about the Air Quality Board locally. Like I said, Lewis got a 5-4 overhaul through, or a vote on a 5-4 overhaul, but you need 6 votes on that dreaded city council in order to overturn a mayoral veto, and Mayor Keller, living true to his far left progressive pedigree, went and vetoed the bill. So it is something that if you get a chance, make some noise about this out there in the Journal and other locations. It's this is obviously a local Albuquerque-Bernalillo County area issue, but it's going to have real negative impacts on businesses and our ability to attract businesses and do business in this city.
Yeah, Paul, and one of the things about laws and regulations like these is the minute it passed, nothing happened. There were no fireworks, there were no explosions, there was no celebration Oh, maybe there was. Not by people who want to live and work and be productive in the greater Albuquerque region. But as things go by, it's one of those. This is kind of almost like a rent control thing. It's like it just makes everything more expensive and more difficult, and shuts down a lot of things that in the past would have been allowed to happen. And lo and behold, you look forward in a few years, and then there'll be a study by the city of Albuquerque that says, "Oh, we're not sure why the economy slowed down here. What happened? We're going to do a study and figure that out." But just say, be on the lookout for a lot of these policies going forward and the damage that they will do to the economy of Albuquerque.
Yeah, and finally, Mexico's Supreme Court has denied Republicans' efforts to change the Yvette Herald District 2 in Congress. This is in agreeing with a lower court judge. So New Mexico's Supreme Court, again, they're all put there by Democrats, but I really didn't see this as a likely successful case for the Republican Party. I felt like it was not going to happen, and indeed it has not happened. The Supreme Court of New Mexico has refused to hear the case, which essentially means that we're going to continue moving forward with the current map. There is a effort to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, but I just don't see that happening. I do think the U.S. Supreme Court made a mistake in opening the door to judicial meddling with those districts, but that really is going to only impact Republican areas in the South, the old Confederacy. States like New Mexico are not seen as having that historical burden, and they're going to remain with the kind of, this is a political calculation, which redistricting has always been. When Egolf said, "I'm coming after Yvette Herald," he was only stating publicly what we know that both sides tried to do in the gerrymandering process. It was, right. It was an impolitic remark by Egolf, but that's kind of Egolf's arrogance and his general approach to the world. It's also every legislature that's ever done redistricting, their general approach is that if they have the numbers, if they have the buy-in to go after the other guys or gals, they will do that. And I think the Republicans should save their money for the campaigns, win some dang campaigns, and then you can impact redistricting in a way that is more positive for the GOP.
Yeah, Paul, in this result, I would just say, if I were writing the headline, in a surprise to no one, the Supreme Court rejected this. What is gerrymandering? As you well said, this is a power and a political decision. The courts have stepped in, but they don't step in nearly as much as you would think. And so you have to be so egregious for the federal courts to get involved in a state like New Mexico, and the odds of that are not very high. And so here's the thing, if you're in power, when you gerrymander, it's just using the data and the analytical process to create fair and honest districts. And the other side always says it's political gerrymandering. And as you well pointed out, it always flips. Who's ever in charge, both sides do it. And in a state like New Mexico, when the Republicans have not had that opportunity very often, over time it can get worse and worse and worse. And as you say, until some elections are won consistently, and being in power on those decades when the census is done to do these districts is huge. And the next big chance comes up in 2030.
Yeah, and in the past two cycles prior to this one, they had Susana Martinez and Gary Johnson in the governor's mansion, and that helped to balance things out with the legislature that was driven by Democrats. In 2020, it was a total Democrat trifecta, which meant that they could slice and dice as they wished. And it's really not that hard in a state like New Mexico, where you have those very conservative areas in the southeast. Quite frankly, to really make New Mexico more completely competitive. You need like some kind of busing system where folks from southeast New Mexico are moved and settled in other areas that are a little more competitive, because it's real easy to draw those lines in Artesia, Hobbs, and Roswell, and Carlsbad. So anyway, we'll leave it there. Won't dwell on that topic. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.